The morning mist clung to the ancient stone walls of Buckingham Palace as Thomas Mitchell adjusted
Yes.
his red tunic for the 100th time that week. At 24, he had dreamed of becoming a Queen's Guard since childhood, imagining the honor and prestige that came with protecting the royal family. What he hadn't imagined were the secrets that would soon change his understanding of everything he thought he knew about palace life. Thomas had been stationed at the palace for only 3 months when he first noticed the peculiar patterns. During the changing of the guard ceremony, tourists would snap thousands of photos, completely unaware that some guards weren't guards at all. Hidden among the traditional red uniforms and towering bearskin hats were plainclothes security officers, their trained eyes scanning crowds for potential threats while maintaining the ceremonial facade. The revelation came during his first night shift. As darkness settled over London, Thomas watched his fellow guards transform from stoic ceremonial figures into highly trained security operatives. The palace, which seemed so peaceful during daylight hours, became a fortress of activity. Motion sensors, thermal imaging cameras, and underground tunnels created an invisible web of protection that the public never suspected existed. His sergeant, a weathered man named Williams with 30 years of service, pulled Thomas aside one evening. "Listen carefully, lad," Williams whispered as they walked through a corridor lined with priceless paintings. "What you see here stays here. The royal family's safety depends on secrets that have been kept for generations." Thomas nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to learn something that would burden him forever. That same week, Thomas witnessed his first Code Silver alert. Within seconds, the entire palace transformed. Guards who had been standing motionless suddenly moved with military precision, sealing entrances and securing areas with an efficiency that spoke of countless hours of training. The threat turned out to be a false alarm, but Thomas realized that every ceremonial guard was also a highly trained soldier, ready to defend the crown at a moment's notice. As Thomas settled into his role, he began to understand that being a royal guard meant living a double life. By day, he stood motionless, while tourists took selfies, enduring hours of stillness in all weather conditions. By night, he became part of an elite security force protecting some of the world's most important people. The weight of responsibility pressed down on his shoulders, but with it came a sense of pride that few people would ever understand. The palace walls had witnessed centuries of history, and Thomas was now part of that continuing story. He learned that every guard before him had carried similar secrets, passed down through generations of men and women who understood that some knowledge was too dangerous to share with the outside world. As he walked his post that first month, Thomas began to realize that the real mystery wasn't what secrets the palace held, but how many guards had carried these burdens before him, and how many would carry them after he was gone. 3 months into his service, Thomas discovered the palace's most closely guarded secret wasn't about security protocols or hidden passages. It was about the guards themselves and the psychological toll of maintaining perfect composure while the world watched. During a routine medical check, Thomas met Dr. Sarah Chen, the palace's private physician who had been treating guards for over a decade. Dr. Chen's office was tucked away in the palace's medical wing, a place most visitors never knew existed. As she examined Thomas, she spoke quietly about the unique challenges faced by royal guards. "People think standing still for hours is easy," she explained, checking his posture and muscle tension. "But your bodies and minds are under constant stress. You're performing for millions of people while remaining alert for potential threats." Thomas learned that many guards suffered from what Dr. Chen called ceremonial syndrome, a combination of physical strain and mental exhaustion that came from maintaining the perfect balance between pageantry and security. Some guards developed chronic pain from standing motionless for hours, while others struggled with anxiety from being constantly photographed and scrutinized by the public. The doctor shared stories that revealed the human side of the guards' experiences. She told Thomas about a guard who had fainted during a particularly hot summer ceremony, but managed to fall backward in perfect formation, never breaking character even while unconscious. Another guard had stood through a wasp sting on his face during a royal wedding, his training so ingrained that he didn't even flinch as the insect attacked. But the most challenging part of their job wasn't physical discomfort or even security threats. It was the isolation that came with keeping secrets. Guards couldn't discuss their work with family members, couldn't share the extraordinary things they witnessed, and couldn't seek support for the unique pressures they faced. Dr. Chen had become not just their physician, but their confidant. The only person who truly understood the weight they carried. Thomas began to notice the signs of stress in his fellow guards. Johnson, a 5-year veteran, had developed a slight tremor in his left hand that only appeared after long ceremonial duties. Martinez, who had guarded 3 royal weddings, spoke in his sleep about protecting imaginary crowds. Even Sergeant Williams, with all his experience, sometimes stared off into the distance with a haunted expression that spoke of too many secrets kept for too long. The palace provided support systems that the public never knew about. Weekly counseling sessions were mandatory but never recorded. Physical therapy was available around the clock. Nutrition specialists ensured guards could maintain their strength despite irregular eating schedules. Yet despite all these resources, Thomas realized that some burdens could only be carried, never truly shared, during quiet moments between duties. Thomas would walk through the palace gardens and think about the generations of guards who had walked the same paths. Each had carried their own secrets, witnessed their own extraordinary moments, and struggled with the same isolation. The red uniform that made him feel proud during ceremonies sometimes felt like a prison during his private moments, separating him from the normal world where people could speak freely about their work and their experiences. As autumn arrived and Thomas marked his 6th month of service, he understood that becoming a royal guard meant accepting a life lived in the shadows of history, where the greatest honor came with the greatest sacrifice of personal freedom. The revelation came on a rainy Tuesday morning when Thomas was assigned to the palace's restricted archives. Deep beneath the public areas, climate-controlled rooms that smelled of old paper and leather, he discovered the Guard Chronicles, detailed records kept by royal guards dating back over 2 centuries. Each entry told a story that history books would never record. Thomas found himself reading accounts that made his own experiences seem ordinary. A guard from 1887 had written about protecting Queen Victoria during 7 assassination attempts that were never made public. Another entry from 1936 described guards who had secretly helped remove evidence of King Edward VIII's controversial relationships before his abdication. The chronicles revealed that royal guards had always been more than ceremonial figures. They had been the silent protectors of royal reputation as much as royal lives. One entry particularly captured Thomas's attention. Written in 1953 by Guard Captain Edmund Rothwell, it described the night before Queen Elizabeth II's coronation. Rothwell had discovered a credible assassination plot, but had been ordered to handle it without involving police or creating public panic. Working with only 3 other guards, he had identified and quietly detained the conspirators, ensuring the coronation proceeded without the public ever knowing how close they had come to witnessing a tragedy. The archives contained photographs that would never appear in any museum. Guards standing watch during secret diplomatic meetings. Protection details for royal family members whose very existence was kept from the public. Images of guards in civilian clothes, blending into crowds at events where their presence was never officially acknowledged. Thomas realized that the public face of the Royal Guard was just the tip of an iceberg that extended deep into the shadows of British history, but the most shocking discovery was a sealed section marked Operation Silent Shield, with trembling hands. Thomas opened files that revealed the existence of a special unit within the Guards, men and women selected not just for their physical abilities, but for their capacity to keep absolute silence. These guards were assigned to protect secrets that could destabilize governments. Not just the royal family, the files revealed that silent shield. Guards had prevented 3 foreign espionage attempts in the past decade alone. They had protected visiting dignitaries whose identities were so sensitive that even their own security details weren't told who they were guarding. Some had spent years living undercover, maintaining false identities while monitoring threats that the public would never know existed. Thomas read about Guard Lieutenant Maria Santos, who had spent 2 years working as a hotel cleaner to monitor a suspected terrorist cell, planning an attack during a royal visit. Her sacrifice had prevented an incident that could have changed the course of modern British history. Yet her name would never appear in any official record. She had returned to regular guard duty without recognition. Carrying the weight of her secret service in silence, the chronicles also revealed the personal cost of such dedication. Guards who had suffered nervous breakdowns from the pressure, marriages that had failed because spouses couldn't understand the demands of absolute secrecy, children who had grown up thinking their parents were simply ceremonial guards, never knowing their mothers and fathers were actually secret agents protecting national security. As Thomas closed the last file, he realized that his own service was just beginning to scratch the surface of what it truly meant to be a royal guard. The red uniform and bearskin hat were symbols recognized around the world, but they concealed a reality that was far more complex and dangerous than anyone could imagine. Every guard who wore the uniform became part of a legacy that stretched back through centuries of silent sacrifice, unknown heroism, and secrets that would die with those who kept them. The summons came at midnight on a cold February evening. Thomas was pulled from his regular duties and escorted to a part of the palace he had never seen before. Through a series of locked doors and down a narrow staircase, he found himself in what appeared to be a modern command center, hidden beneath centuries-old stone foundations. Banks of computer screens displayed feeds from cameras he didn't even know existed. While communications equipment hummed quietly in the background, Commander Rebecca Harrison stood waiting for him, her presence commanding respect despite her slight frame. Thomas had heard whispers about Harrison, a former E5 operative who had joined the palace guard after a classified incident that no one dared discuss. She gestured for him to sit at a conference table where 3 other guards waited, their faces grave in the blue light of the screens. "What you're about to learn," Harrison began, her voice barely above a whisper, "will change how you see your role here forever. Each of you has been selected for Operation Silent Shield based on your psychological evaluations and demonstrated ability to maintain confidentiality. From this moment forward, you are no longer just guards. You are intelligence operatives." Thomas learned that the palace served as a hub for international intelligence gathering, with royal guards providing the perfect cover for operations that required absolute discretion. Foreign dignitaries visiting the palace never suspected that the elite ceremonial guards greeting them were actually trained intelligence officers, gathering information through sophisticated surveillance equipment hidden in their uniforms and weapons. The training that followed was unlike anything Thomas had experienced in the military. He learned to read micro-expressions that could reveal deception, to memorize conversations verbatim without appearing to pay attention, and to operate miniature recording devices that were virtually undetectable. Most challenging of all, he learned to maintain his ceremonial guard facade while simultaneously conducting intelligence operations. His first real assignment came 3 weeks later during a state dinner. For a visiting foreign minister whose country was suspected of funding terrorist activities, Thomas stood at attention in the dining hall, his uniform hiding a sophisticated listening device that could pick up conversations from across the room. To the guests, he was simply part of the palace's grandeur. In reality, he was gathering intelligence that would be analyzed by agencies across the globe. The psychological pressure was enormous. Thomas had to process and remember crucial conversations while maintaining the blank expression required of a ceremonial guard. One misplaced glance, one moment of visible reaction, could blow his cover and potentially compromise ongoing international investigations. The training had prepared him for the technical aspects, but nothing could prepare him for the mental strain of living multiple lives simultaneously. During his 3rd month with Silent Shield, Thomas witnessed something that would haunt him forever. A visiting diplomat, believing himself safe in the privacy of the palace's guest quarters, made a phone call that revealed plans for an attack on civilian targets in London. Thomas, monitoring from the hidden command center, watched as his intelligence was immediately relayed to counterterrorism units. Within hours, arrests were made across the city, preventing what could have been one of the deadliest terrorist attacks in British history. But the success came with a terrible realization. The diplomat was a man Thomas had served tea to during official ceremonies, someone he had guided through the palace with courtesy and respect. The friendly conversations they had shared were now revealed as elaborate deception, with both men playing roles that concealed their true purposes. Thomas understood that in the world of Silent Shield, nothing was ever what it seemed. The other guards in his unit dealt with the pressure in different ways. Collins, a former Army Ranger, threw himself into physical training with an intensity that worried their supervisors. Peterson started keeping detailed personal journals, though he could never write about the work that consumed most of his life. Williams, the veteran sergeant, had developed an almost supernatural ability to compartmentalize, switching between his public and secret roles with an ease that both impressed and disturbed his colleagues. Thomas began to understand that the palace's greatest secret wasn't any single piece of information or hidden room. It was the fact that the entire institution served as a front for one of the world's most effective intelligence operations. Hidden in plain sight behind centuries of tradition and ceremony. 2 years into his service with Silent Shield, Thomas faced his most challenging assignment yet. Intelligence reports suggested that someone within the palace itself was selling secrets to foreign agents. The betrayal cut deep, one of their own, someone who had taken the same oaths and carried the same burdens, had chosen personal gain over duty and country. Commander Harrison assembled the core team in the underground command center, her usual composed demeanor showing cracks of anger and disappointment. "This isn't just about catching a traitor," she explained, displaying photographs and documents on the main screen. "This person has access to information that could compromise ongoing operations in 12 countries. Every day they remain free, more lives are at risk." The investigation required Thomas to spy on his own colleagues, people he had shared meals with, trained beside, and trusted with his life. He learned to watch for subtle signs, unusual interest in classified briefings, changes in spending habits, secretive phone calls, and meetings with individuals not cleared for palace access. The work ate away at him, transforming the camaraderie he had once enjoyed with fellow guards into a constant state of suspicion and analysis. The breakthrough came through the most mundane of sources. Thomas noticed that Guard Corporal James Fletcher had been making regular trips to a small cafe in Westminster, always during his off-duty hours and always alone. Surveillance revealed that Fletcher was meeting with a woman identified as Elena Petrov, a suspected Russian intelligence operative who had been on MI5's watch list for 2 years. The discovery devastated Thomas more than he had expected. Fletcher was someone he had genuinely liked. A quiet man with a dry sense of humor who had helped Thomas adjust to palace life during his early months of service. They had stood side by side during countless ceremonies, shared the unique bond that came from enduring the pressures of their unusual job. Learning that Fletcher had been betraying, that trust felt like discovering a brother had been secretly working to destroy everything he held dear. The decision was made to continue surveillance rather than make an immediate arrest. Fletcher's access could reveal the full extent of the intelligence breach and potentially expose other compromised operations. For 3 agonizing weeks, Thomas had to work alongside Fletcher, maintaining normal conversation and behavior while knowing that every friendly exchange was a lie. The psychological toll was enormous. Thomas began having nightmares where he couldn't distinguish between friends and enemies, where everyone around him wore masks that constantly shifted between familiar faces and threatening strangers. The final confrontation happened during a routine night shift. Fletcher, unaware that his activities had been discovered, attempted to access classified files that were beyond his security clearance. As alarms sounded silently through the palace's security network, Thomas found himself face to face with a man he had considered a friend. Both of them armed and trained to kill. "You don't understand," Fletcher said desperately as security personnel surrounded them. "They have my sister. They took her 3 months ago and said they'd kill her if I didn't cooperate. I never wanted to betray anyone. I was trying to save the only family I have left." The revelation added another layer of complexity to an already painful situation. Fletcher wasn't a willing traitor, but a man trapped by circumstances beyond his control. The arrest was handled with the same secrecy that surrounded all Silent Shield operations. Officially, Fletcher was transferred to another assignment. In reality, he disappeared into the intelligence community's witness protection system after providing full cooperation in dismantling the spy network that had threatened him and his sister. The sister was recovered alive, though the psychological trauma of her ordeal would require years of treatment. For Thomas, Fletcher's betrayal and the circumstances that led to it served as a harsh lesson about the true cost of their secret work. Every guard in Silent Shield lived with the knowledge that their service made them and their loved ones potential targets. The very secrecy that protected national security also isolated them from normal support systems, making them vulnerable to exactly the kind of manipulation that had ensnared Fletcher. The palace continued to function as it always had. Tourists still took photographs of guards who appeared to be simple ceremonial figures, and the world remained unaware of how close it had come to a major intelligence disaster. But for Thomas and the other Silent Shield operatives, the betrayal served as a reminder that their greatest enemy might not be foreign agents or terrorist organizations, but the psychological pressure and moral isolation that came with living lives built entirely on necessary lies. 5 years after that first morning when Thomas had nervously adjusted his red tunic, he stood once again in the palace courtyard. But now everything had changed. The tourists still took their photographs. The ceremonies continued with their ancient precision, and the guards maintained their stoic expressions. But Thomas now understood that he was part of something far greater and more dangerous than he had ever imagined possible. The final revelation came not through dramatic confrontation or secret documents, but through a quiet conversation with Commander Harrison as she prepared to retire. In her private office,
surrounded by commendations,
she could never publicly display in photographs of operations that would never appear in history books. She shared the truth about the Royal Guard's ultimate purpose. "People think we protect the monarchy," Harrison said, her voice carrying the weight of decades of secrets. "But we actually protect something much more valuable, the stability that allows democracy to function. Every secret we keep, every threat we neutralize, every intelligence operation we conduct serves to maintain the delicate balance that keeps society from descending into chaos." She explained that the Silent Shield program was just one layer of a security apparatus that had evolved over centuries. The Royal Guards were the visible symbol of British tradition. But beneath that symbolism lay a network that connected to intelligence services, diplomatic missions, and security operations around the globe. The palace wasn't just the monarch's residence. It was the nerve center for activities that shaped international relations in ways the public would never know. Thomas learned that his own service had contributed to preventing 2 terrorist attacks, 3 assassination attempts, and 1 conspiracy that could have destabilized the European Union. He had played a role in gathering intelligence that helped resolve international crises before they could escalate into wars, yet none of this could ever be acknowledged publicly, and he would carry these achievements to his grave without recognition or thanks from those whose lives his work had saved. The psychological impact of this knowledge was profound. Thomas realized that he and his fellow guards existed in a parallel world where their most important accomplishments had to remain forever hidden. They were heroes who could never be celebrated, soldiers who fought battles that officially never happened, protectors whose very existence as anything more than ceremonial figures had to be denied. As Harrison handed him a sealed envelope containing his next assignment, a 3-year posting to a diplomatic mission under deep cover, Thomas understood that his service was entering a new phase. He would leave the palace and the red uniform behind, but the secrets and the responsibility would travel with him wherever he went. Once you became part of Silent Shield, there was no true retirement. Only different assignments in an endless war fought in shadows and silence. Standing in the palace gardens one final time, Thomas thought about all the guards who had walked these paths before him and all those who would follow. Each generation discovered the same truth, that protecting the things people held most dear often required sacrifices that those very people could never know about or understand. The burden was enormous. But so was the honor of being trusted with such responsibility. The tourists continued to snap their photographs, unaware that the guards standing motionless before them might have prevented a terrorist attack the week before, or gathered intelligence that would prevent an international incident the following month. They saw ceremony and tradition, pageantry and history. They would never see the human cost of maintaining the secrets that kept their world safe, or understand the extraordinary dedication of ordinary people who chose to carry impossible burdens in service of something greater than themselves. As Thomas walked away from the palace, for the last time in his ceremonial uniform, he carried with him not just the secrets of his service, but the knowledge that some mysteries were meant to remain hidden. The greatest protection the royal guards provided wasn't physical security for the royal family, but the preservation of innocence for a world that could sleep peacefully, precisely because it didn't know how much danger surrounded it every day, or how many silent guardians stood watch in the shadows to keep that danger at bay. The red tunic would be worn by someone else tomorrow, but the secrets would endure, passed from one generation of guards to the next, an unbroken chain of silent service stretching back through centuries and forward into an uncertain future where their vigilance remained as necessary as it had ever been. Asterisk.